I got the message now. It's recording.
Okay. So we are Team.Epione and we are basically spreading awareness in our community for reducing the amount of smokers. And we just wanted to hear your perspective on this and just wanted to ask you a few set of questions regarding the health risk associated with smoking. So to begin with, what is your name? Where do you live? And where do you work?
Yeah, Assalamu alaikum. Thank you so much for inviting me to do this interview. I think what you guys are doing is very important, and a very important and pressing issue. So I live in USA in Florida, and I'm a neuroscience researcher, and I also work as a medical assistant in a cancer center.
All right. So as you know, dangers associated with smoking are widely known in Pakistan, but still an increasing amount of people smoke. Why is that?
Yeah, so I think it can be a combination of a number of things. First one is, of course, addiction, but that addiction has to start somewhere. So it can be from normalizing smoking. It could be things that they've seen in their own household or in their community that smoking is normalized. It's something that they're pressured into doing from peers or something that's seen as cool. And so it's almost encouraged in certain areas. It could be a way to relieve stress. Usually in more poverty stricken areas, smoking is more common because it gives them that relief or pleasure that they don't normally get in their hectic and busy schedules. So they're looking for that quick relief that smoking gives. And then, of course, when they get to the point of addiction, it's just to keep that feeling going so they don't enter withdrawal, which is a negative feeling.
Yes, very right. And so in your experience, how does smoking cause neurological health problems?
So, because of my background in neuroscience and then also working with cancer patients, I think I could provide both perspectives. So, from a neuroscience perspective, um, smoke cigarettes and e-cigarettes both are have a lot of neurotoxins and a lot of different chemicals such as nicotine is the most common one that we all know of, but there are actually a lot of other chemicals that are stuffed into cigarettes like carbon monoxide and a lot heavy metals, and all of these different chemicals cause damage to our neurons, which are our brain cells, and they can disrupt neurotransmitter systems. So, neurotransmitters are basically the chemicals that our brain releases to send messages across different cells. And so when these are damaged, it can damage the formation of, healthy brain systems and networks, and then also our ability to form coherent thoughts. And overall, this can prolonged exposure to neurotoxins, which are in these cigarettes, can lead to cell death. So, the, causing these brain cells to die over time. Um, it can also result in damage to our vessels in our body, which then reduces blood flow to the brain. So these are problems that originate within the peripheral sides of our body, not in our brain, but eventually they lead to damage of the brain because your brain isn't getting the necessary oxygen that it needs. So it can lead to strokes and dementia. There's also a lot of inflammation and oxidative stress that can be caused by smoking. As I mentioned earlier, cigarettes and e-cigarettes, they have a lot of different toxins in them. Aside from just addictive material, um, nicotine, there's a lot of other things stuffed in there, and that includes free radicals. So, free radicals are a type of highly reactive material that causes oxidative stress in our body. So these are just materials that are very reactive. So they're going around bumping into things and causing inflammation in our body. And although free radicals, when you eat something and your body is breaking down that material, it also naturally induces, excretes free radicals. But that is an endogenous process. Our body knows how to deal with it. When we're getting these things externally and at such a high volume from, typically when people smoke, they're not just smoking, one cigarette a week. They're probably smoking a lot. That can cause a lot of free radicals to enter our body. So there are a lot of these little things bumping around, causing inflammation. And that can lead to, as I mentioned, brain damage and damage to our vascular system, that can have risks in the long term. But if those things, bump into more potent information like our genetic material, that can create a increased risk for cancer. Um, and it also increases the risk for diseases like Alzheimer's and Parkinson's.
All
Um,
right. So, do you believe that smoking from a young age may inflict more harm to a growing teenager than an adult?
Yes, absolutely. Because when you're growing, when you're in your adolescent years, your prefrontal cortex and your hippocampus are developing. So your prefrontal cortex is the front part of your brain, and it's responsible for decision making and executive function. And then the hippocampus is involved in memory and learning. And those two parts of your brain are very vulnerable at this time. So nicotine disrupts the development of those neural networks that you're making as you grow up, and in the long term it can lead to cognitive dysfunction and issues with forming memory and attention disorders. And it can also, if you're smoking from a young age, it can increase your risk of developing an addiction, because your brain cells are more plastic. And what that means is your brain cells are more susceptible to making connections, right? If you think about it, babies, they learn the way that, younger kids are able to learn things so quickly is because their brains, they're at a period where they're growing rapidly. And it's because those brain cells and neurons are making connections with each other continuously, and they need that. But when you have interference from things like nicotine and these harmful chemicals, it's stopping those things from happening, and it's actually forming bad connections, like the need for these addictive materials like nicotine. And it makes it harder for them to quit in later years, as opposed to people who would, start smoking uh, after their brain has fully developed. Um, it also has very high mental health risks for people who smoke at a young age, because, again, they're not developing the way that they should be. And this not only is their, autonomic health, but it's also their mental health that's being affected. So they have a higher risk for depression and anxiety and other mood disorders, because again, this is disrupting in their prefrontal cortex. It's disrupting their memory, but also their mood. So nicotine is addictive because it releases certain chemicals that make you happy, and it makes you feel pleasure. But when you're receiving that externally, your brain has a way of making those chemicals internally already. So when it does that externally, your brain doesn't make it on its own. So you have less of a dependence on your body's ability to naturally make you happy and self-soothe. And then you become even more dependent on an external source.
All right. So, does this issue also exist in your community as well? And can you kindly also compare it to the situation in Pakistan?
Yes, so it is a very prevalent issue. I think that in general, speaking from a female perspective, I think the biggest difference might be that in Pakistani society, it is more of a seen as a social taboo for women to smoke. So the biggest difference that I've noticed is that less women in Pakistan smoke as opposed to Western countries like the U.S. And this is backed by demographic statistics of what percentage of women smoke in the US compared to Pakistan. Um, but one thing that remains common is that typically people from a rural or more poverty-stricken background, they have a higher chance of smoking. And again, it's because of the same factors, probably because the financial stress causes them to seek these outlets to derive pleasure from, to take a break. And then, poverty-stricken areas, they have less access to resources that can help them um, get rid of their addiction, and less access to the awareness that these things are bad, because typically in their communities it's already, a lot of people are already smoking. It's smoking, buying cigarettes is also cheaper in Pakistan, so that could be another risk. um, or an incentive for someone to, continue their addiction. Whereas, and over here, they have a lot of anti-smoking campaigns, and as well as there's a lot of taxes, additional taxes that are put on cigarettes and e-cigarettes to try and incentivize people to quit. And I'm not sure if those programs are as prevalent in Pakistan. Does that
All
answer your
right.
question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Perfectly. So, what is the one message that you would like to give to the youth?
Um, I think that it's very important to recognize that smoking is not cool. I think it's something, at least with the traditional cigarettes, that my generation realized. And but then there was this rise of e-cigarettes. So I think for the current generation, we saw the effects of smoking from cigarettes. And there are a lot of, awareness campaigns for that. And generally, at least in the West, there is an awareness that smoking is bad. But because of the rise of e-cigarettes, which is relatively more novel, um, it's seen as cool and it's seen as popular, and we're trying to make it as something. It's not really smoking; it's something else. But it's the exact same thing, right? It's just a different form. So it's understanding that smoking is not cool at all. And another thing, when you're young, you think that, usually people start off when they're young and they have a problem quitting later on, um, that you can quit whenever you want. But these materials, even though it's in such a tiny little thing, having a smoke or e-cigarette, can have a profound impact on your body and your mental health. It can be nearly impossible. It can feel almost impossible to quit after you start, right? Um, and a lot of people start because they might have a lot of issues in their life and they're looking for a source of relief, or a break, or a pleasure outlet. And so they to look to these addictive substances. But you could have 100 problems in your life until that problem is health. And then you just have one problem and it's your health. So all of these issues that you could develop later on in your life, from smoking, dementia, cancer, um, cardiac diseases. It's better to not even have that as a possibility, because once you do, that's so much suffering. And then that's going to be the one problem in your life that you have to deal with. So it's very important to realize that these brands are not going to put all of these issues out there because they profit off of young people buying cigarettes, buying e-cigarettes, and making those purchases. But you are responsible for your own health. So I think that would be my one message.
Okay, thank you. Over to you, Mohit.
Okay, so as a youth organization, what do you suggest we do to combat this issue in our local community?
I think you, as the youth, you can relate more to people that are of your own demographic. So maybe creating support groups, because I think it's easy to say all of these things, that smoking is bad, but it can be very difficult when you're going through it. So having a group of people come together, a support group, and having them, kind of people who are in the same situation, but incentivizing them to get better over time, and providing them that support can be helpful. Also, spreading awareness, like you guys are already doing, that can be very helpful. Getting resources for those people over time. Like, for example, nicotine patches are a great substitute for people who want to quit. It was originally, the pipeline was cigarettes, and then you would go from cigarettes to e-cigarettes, and eventually it would be, from e-cigarettes you would go to nicotine patches, which are less addictive. But now the research is showing that e-cigarettes are more addictive than, normal cigarettes. So oftentimes, young people, usually now they're just starting off with e-cigarettes. They're not, smoking the traditional cigarette anymore. They can find themselves stuck there, so trying to incentivize them to continue in that pipeline, uh, looking for if there's any resources for nicotine patches, or there's also nicotine infused gummies that they could use. So they're still getting those little hits of nicotine, but it's not accompanied with all of the other toxic chemicals, and it's at a much lower dosage than they would be getting from an e-cigarette.
Okay, so surrounded with people who smoke, we've heard all kinds of perspectives. We've heard that smoking isn't that harmful. We've heard that if you have a good diet and you smoke, that it isn't really concerning. And we've heard that if you drink water, you can wash out the effects of a cigarette. Could you elaborate if such perspectives are flawed, and how so?
Yes, that is very inaccurate, actually. And I think it's a way for maybe people who have that addiction, or for people who have a loved one who is a smoker, to come to terms with that and cope with it and maybe justify themselves. It can be very vulnerable because when you think of addiction, it seems like, although we're trying to raise awareness, which is a very good thing, it can sometimes feel like, maybe everyone's pointing a finger at you and calling you an addict, saying that you're a smoker and you're an addict and you're out of control. So it can have all of these different negative connotations. So they're just trying to justify themselves, maybe. But scientifically, that is inaccurate. Um, so all of these things that, you can wash out nicotine if you take supplements, those are things that I've heard as well. But at the same time, I've seen all of those people and they have Alzheimer's, and now they have like stage 3, stage 4 cancer. So all of those things, all of those toxins that are in cigarettes, if you look into the research, the science is accurate. It's right. Um, I talked earlier a bit about when our body is digesting compounds, we also produce naturally free radicals, and those are the same free radicals that are found in cigarettes. The difference is that our body has a natural way of getting rid of those as well. Even if, if they're at a higher level, it won't compare to what you get from smoking like a pack of cigarettes a day, right? Um, so it's very important to understand, our bodies understand what we're going through. And when we are externally putting all of these harmful chemicals in our body, intentionally doing that, we're disrupting our body's natural process of maintaining our health and taking care of ourselves. And then when you think about all of these supplements, I've heard that as well, that, if I just take these supplements, the reason that they're saying that is because those free radicals, they're also getting rid of the natural vitamins in your body too. So like they're like, if you take a vitamin C supplement and you're also smoking, it's because that smoking part is degrading at the vitamin C in your body. But the thing is, as you're taking away from it, you're also leaving a gap, right? You're degrading away at all of these other nutrients that your body needs. So when you buy packets of these like multivitamins, you see in the description that these are XYZ benefits. Um, when you go into smoking, I'm sure that they have, in certain places, in very small writing, all of the negative benefits. But if you were to total all of that up and compare it to all of the benefits you receive from taking like 10 different multivitamins, you put the 10 different multivitamins next to one little tiny cigarette, and I think that decision is very obvious. What's better, to take those 10 gummies or to, not smoke, right? Does that answer your
Thank
question?
you very much. Thank you. Over to you, Abdullah.
So I would like to ask you, considering the trend, do you believe that there will be more patients with diseases related to smoking in the future?
Yes, and some of that research is already coming out. Now the battle is it's an uphill battle now, and it's with e-cigarettes. So cigarettes, and past few decades, I think there was a lot of research that came out on cigarettes, and there was a lot of awareness campaigns. And for the most part, I think general population is very aware that smoking cigarettes is bad. E-cigarettes, though, it's the research is just now coming out, and the reason is it's very new, right? So the population that started smoking at a young age, those people are around, like, senior citizens now. The population that is smoking e-cigarettes, they are my age or your age, or maybe a few years older, right? And they started smoking when they were my age or your age. So it's going to take a few years, and those studies are going to come out, and it's going to age as we age. But we already know, history repeats itself. E-cigarettes are probably going to be worse from what the research is showing. And the reason is because e-cigarettes they have a higher content of nicotine. And the way that it's marketed is, they have a higher content of nicotine, but it's a lot less of those, that leaves less room for all of those other chemicals. So overall, it's less harmful chemicals than cigarettes, but it's higher content of nicotine. So that actually leads to an increased addiction. And the effects are going to be different, but they're still going to be bad. Does that answer your question?
Yes, exactly. So I would like to ask the last question. Does I
Abdullah,
would
you're muted.
I would like to ask last question. Does smoking increase the risk of memory loss or dementia?
Yes, and it can even exacerbate existing conditions. So, dementia and Alzheimer's, they fall on a spectrum. And smoking can make worse the process. So it's not set in stone. Every person is different. If you're diagnosed with um, these diseases that cause memory loss, but we know that it can exacerbate the symptoms and lead to faster progression between the different stages of Alzheimer's and dementia, and even other neurodegenerative diseases like Parkinson's. And this is because we know that smoking is a risk factor for the accumulation of amyloid plaques. And these are things that are known to be triggers for Alzheimer's and Parkinson's. It can also impair blood flow from the peripheral nerves to your brain and increase the possibility of having stroke.
So I would like to thank you for your perspective on smoking and community betterment. I hope your insights prove very helpful and innovative for us. I appreciate you taking the time to share your knowledge with us. Thank you very much.